one size fits all in India is kind of like is not really good. I mean,
we are vast in a good way, you see.
Yeah, but we're also diverse in a very good way.
We are working, and for a long time we tried to be like men, but I don't think that's possible.
I like how you made the point of beautiful men and women are uniting too.
Home science. Thana aisa
No, but there's a lot of calculation put into it, right?
Only women studied home science.
Suddenly a big appetite for slow cinema.
Altruism of sit down, have a cup of tea is the last thing she needs. You know, actually her staying alone and folding those clothes is more the therapeutic moment.
This darkness in her that I enjoy playing.
If independent filmmaking is difficult, we can share, if we share that difficulty, maybe it's not so difficult after all.
That was actually never really a possibility because everybody came on board fundamentally knowing it was their film.
Well, hi everybody. I'm not sure we should get started on introductions because I think that could take us the next hour entirely. But it's good to be here, good to be discussing Shadowbox, a film that I caught recently, and I think there's plenty to discuss about it. For those of you who don't know it, it's a film that has been selected at the Berlin Film Festival for screening under the Perspective section. So yeah, that's the context for this conversation, and without me having to address any of you individually, let's just keep it a conversation, right? Because first of all, I'd really struggle if I were to do that. So I think a good, maybe a slightly generic space from which to start off would be to speak about the film festival specifically. You know, how much hinges on the validation of a film festival for a film like this. What does that mean? What does the selection there mean? Any of you go.
I think perhaps validation is a patronizing word for it. Festivals do go a long way because especially for independent films which don't have a ready roster of distributors or broadcasters, etc., it becomes this kind of a place that both announces to the world that there has been quality control and there's been a whole line of curators who have said that this works for them, but also a kind of a celebration of cinema. So I think for a lot of films that are without a home, it often becomes almost disproportionately powerful. That is one. So, and including various films that we've all here worked on, festivals have really become the space where these films have met their distributors and so on. But at least for me, I mean, all of us in the room are also cinephiles, and everything, all the mercenary, business, pragmatic aspects aside, we've all also really wanted to, go to these sort of pilgrimages of cinema and seeing great films.
Is that like a huge differentiating factor, the fact that a film like this gets picked at a festival for screening or not? Does that make or break the film in a way? I definitely don't mean to patronize.
Most definitely not break.
Okay.
I do think that it gives quite a level up if your film is in a good festivals, because as we all know, suddenly one day in one fell swoop, after the announcement, you suddenly get emails from sales agents, and there's a kind of a flutter around the film and a kind of spotlight that most independent filmmakers often wish for. At least that was the case with many of us. So it definitely helps, it definitely gives a leg up. Having said that, we now know that there are enough films, there are dime a dozen films that haven't gone through the festival route and have yet done fairly well.
I see. I think the Berlin Festival had about 7 Indian feature films last year. And I understand that at Rotterdam and a couple of other spaces, Indian films are starting to do really well. I know Vetri's film, for example, Bad Girl won something earlier. Yeah. So do you see this as a good time for Indian cinema, largely at a specific type of cinema cut away from the mainstream?
Well, I mean, if you take the last 2 years alone, yes, from the fiction world. I think documentaries have been doing much better before that. But yes, in the fiction world, you had Girls Will Be Girls won the Audience Award at Sundance last year. Payal's film, of course, won the Grand Prix. Sabarbonda, which is produced by Naren and Sid in this room, has won the world dramatic at Sundance, and now Vetri and Anurag's production. So I mean, yeah, if you look at just this, it's great. It's fantastic. It's the fact that these films are out there. They're reaching out to an audience, an international audience, hopefully, and they all get, at least in the case of films last year, they got distribution, they got seen in theaters, they got streaming deals. So all that is great. But again, it's a very, very small, tiny bit of what's actually.
Do you see a pattern for why this specific 2 years specifically? I mean, is there something that strikes you as being uniform across?
I think maybe in the overall, the fact that Indian films have now been getting co-producers, they've been getting sales agents and distribution from and partners who are coming on very early in the
Right, the business of it, not necessarily the content of it.
Both. I think it's both. It's content and the business of it. But the fact that you have, I mean, sometimes it feels like maybe it's it's too negative to make it sound like gatekeeping. But yes, but having a Western partner on your film, European partner on your film, for example, it makes your process of getting into a festival easier than it does without. But having said that, it's up to the film at the end of the day. If the film is good and if the film really resonates with people, which I clearly believe that at least these 4 films have done, then it's a good sign.
This is an age of instant validation, right? Dopamine hits everywhere, left, right, and center. I say this because how do you, in this age particularly, develop a taste for a certain kind of cinema which demands patience, I think. At least from my perspective, it demands that you stay with it, that you don't get restless about things. And I said, I mean, last year one of my most favorite film was The Bad Girl, Kottakali, right? And then there was All We Imagine Is Light, and now we've got Shadowbox. So, well, do you have any advice?
I think advice. Well, I don't know advice, but
because I'll tell you this. I interact with a lot of people who have been raised only in mainstream cinema, who find it very difficult, and I had a tough time convincing a lot of people why Kottakali was a great film. Because they were raised in a certain other grammar and they found it hard to, sit with this grammar specifically. So I wonder what they must do to sort of prepare themselves on some level.
Well, I think the fact of the crisis in one's attention economy or steadily sort of dwindling attention economies is unmistakable and obvious. But alongside that, I think is an opportunity insofar as we have seen that there's suddenly a big appetite for slow cinema. And slow cinema has made a resounding comeback. Or even regular mainstream films like, Brutalist is really long, or Zone of Interest did really well last year. Or the films of, say, Apichat Pong and so on, all the proponents of significantly slower films seem to say that there's more, interest in their work.
Do you have any Indian examples too?
Well, I think a lot of the films that some of us here have made are also on the slower end of the spectrum. And one would expect that because of today's Insta attention spans, it's that kind of work would be entirely rejected. But I actually think that there's some, like a flip sort of a thing has happened where there is more...
I mean, the attention span is one part of it. I think the other part of it is just preparing for a different grammar entirely with respect to the cinema that you're consuming, right?
But I think one thing that became clear as well is we had the opportunity to be at the Sundance Film Festival and speak to people who are trying to look at this in terms of distribution models there, is that there's an antiquated model of looking at distribution as a one-size-fits-all, or looking at, even if you look at India and as large an audience India is, if you just look at the size of our population and the size of a cinema-going population and you look at our biggest hit, whatever it might be, and look at that as the percentage of that population that's gone there, it's still a very small number. So the idea that there's one audience and that there's one kind of audience for one kind of film, I think is an older one. We are in an age which is not so geolocated, which is very porous. People are watching things from all over the world, and there's an audience for all kinds of things. So there's a space for every kind of film, and I think the key there is not so much about what we're trying to make or educating someone, because I think everyone's going through those processes on their own with whatever they choose to do, with their own lives. It's more about the model with which films can get made, and also with the way films can find an audience. So it's about identifying that audience.
Not necessarily make this group alone the main group, so to
Exactly, which is not to say that, hey, we need to make a film for this audience, or that there's only one kind of audience, so we need to educate an audience to a certain kind of film. That audience exists, and it's how do we get to them, and how do we make...
I mean, even the place from which I am asking this question comes from a place of, hey, I mean, there are great joys to be had here. And I know that some of you have that. I wish some of you tasted it. But for some reason, you seem resistant to it. So I'm just wondering if there is a way to break it from a place of, well, affection, essentially. Not necessarily from a place of superiority.
Yeah, I think the conversations you were speaking to as well, which is where if you like a film and you love a film, and you're speaking to someone who you think may love that film, but may have a preconceived notion that may stop them from just dipping in.
Yeah.
And then once they dip in, of course, it's up to them.
Yeah, is that how it worked for some of you?
I mean, there's gateway movies, right? There's like there's gateway drugs. I think there's gateway movies to sort of like, to when you get into something, you see, personally for me, when growing up in the 90s, there's either Bollywood sort of stuff over here, or there was at that moment, there was the entire American independent movement that was coming, and Tarantino was out, and Danny Boyle was there, and Fincher was there, and suddenly you see those movies, and that then opens you up into a whole new paradigm of cinema, when the next thing you're doing is watching. From there, you're going back to the masters, you're watching all the European masters, you're watching old Fellini, then you're watching new Fellini, and realizing this, you know what I mean? So everything has a gateway that sort of like takes you from one to the other, to the other, to the other. And
Yeah.
I believe maybe, to what Naren's saying, yes, I think this one size fits all in India is kind of like, is not really good. I mean, we always...
We are vast in a good way, you say.
Yeah, but we're also diverse in a very good way, and I don't see that diversity in cinema. And part of it is, of course, with the fact that we just don't have enough screens, but I'm saying that's a separate discussion. But last year specifically, I remember the fact that there's two, I thought in the genre space, the fact that there's Brahmayogam, which over here, and Long Legs, which are both not the easiest films to watch, and yet they both performed very admirably, you know, for a large, broad audience, which means clearly that pace is not issue, you know, the fact that the film's black and white. I mean, all these things we hear in studios, okay, oh, you can't make a black and white film. Of course you can. Black and white can go make money. You can't make an obtuse horror film. Of course you can. Long Legs went and made money all over the world. So you keep having these, so again, but those are gateways. Somebody who like Long Legs today will like something else tomorrow, will probably enter to be able to watch pure art cinema at some point of time. But it's, I guess, step by step.
I mean, it's interesting. We mentioned a few films here, at least I did. And all these films, I mean, have the protagonist of all these films is a woman, right? All we imagine this film, we've got Kotakali as well. And I wonder if this non-mainstream film category allows for a more equal representation in some way, or to explore stories about women in a very genuine way as well. I think you could probably start with.
No, should women not answer this question?
No, don't have to.
No, I feel like, should we?
Yeah, I
Not
I would
answer it.
rather have the men talk.
They're great stories, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not a question of either or. It's always, it was never a choice to make a film about a woman character, in a sense that why a woman and not a man. It wasn't calculated.
No, yeah, I mean, clearly you don't operate from a place of why this. Yeah. But, you know...
But I think there's a, you know, in the history of cinema and storytelling, there is a huge gap in representing and especially not only representing, but in the voices of, you know, for it to come from women and for it to arise from there, and then if it doesn't need to be that just because it's a woman director they have to make a film about a woman. They could make a film about. So I think there's two questions there. One is the representation, and the other is the voice of. And but in all these cases it was in some ways both, because you know, this story with Tanushree or the other stories, also stories of women told by women in that sense.
And even in the world, you know, like there are films like Substance and all these are coming. You look at all these. It's not just it's happening here now only in India. It's not like that. It's happening on a global scale, and I think. Even though it is a story of a woman, but it is a story of a family. So it is the story of that man, it is the story of that boy. So it is also their stories. So we can't deny that, I think. And in every other film that you're mentioning, actually, the men play a very important part. in there. You know, it's
Mostly damaging parts, but yes.
or revealing parts, if we say.
Fair
like
enough, yeah.
Sort of,
I meant it as a joke, yeah.
Yeah, but I think that is happening.
Yeah.
And
the best sort of husband is a dead husband, right? I think right at the beginning of this film, there's a line that goes, I laughed out loud.
I like that. I like her character, the feistiness of her.
Yeah, I'll stay quiet on that one.
So, but I think it is an interesting time. And I think embracing it will make it more beautiful, more and then we don't have to worry about people's attention span, because then it'll actually address many aspects of people as human beings, as very complicated, interesting human beings. Yes. And I think if you enjoy a story, if you connect to characters, connect to stories, and if you're reminded of things that you've forgotten, I think that will go a long way.
Cheers to that.
I'm not statistically like giving you numbers here. I think it's like how I remember during COVID, there were some people said they wanted to make a film about COVID, and my reaction to it was very like, please. It's like going through World War II and wanting to make a film on World War. It's like, I think the advantage of having a retrospective look, time, distance, to be able to look at something which is huge tectonic shifts in society and the way people relate to each other. And I feel, while I can't articulate this and back it with statistics, as a shared experience between women, not to make this conversation about that this film is gendered in any way, but in general, what is happening is there is a sense of ferment, that I feel is very, very palpable amongst a lot of women I meet across our country and outside. And I think there is something to think about in a social evolutionary sense. The exponential growth of the role of women in society have increased and gone beyond the confines of just homes, right? And we talk about the labor that the labor force that women represent, bring from basics of right to vote, right to work. So I think what happens when that evolutionary growth, which in men happens at a certain into X times, but with women it's happening at 100X, at 1000X. When they are trying to catch up, when we are trying to catch up to something that's a given for men, there is going to be a rub, of a certain kind, and good and bad. And the rub of it, some may be violent, unfortunate, but some of it is also it's like gold, and so there is something that's happening, and I think that something is an exhaustion with monoliths of power, and like, because we are in spaces where we are rubbing shoulders with men who've been in those positions for very long, there is a bubbling of a certain, and I don't even know what to call it. Again, like I'm saying, this is something maybe 50 years from now, someone will be able to articulate what really is happening in our times. But there is something internal, and there is something that binds us together, because you feel it's high time, man. Yeah. It's high time you saw us as not the same, but at least as equal. Yeah. And I think that is going to explode and express in ways, because we are coming into spaces where we are working, and for a long time we tried to be like men, but I don't think that's possible. We have to be like ourselves. And in that expression, how much it's allowed, how much it's not allowed, there is going to be a tussle. And I think all the beautiful men and women who are coming together are trying to make sense of this rub. But it is something that is, I think, that is happening. Maybe it's subterranean, but it's going to like come up in little whatever.
No, I like it. I like it. I can say you don't have the satisfaction of adequately, getting to the exact point of what you're saying, I guess, because you're talking about how it's probably a bit too early to.
I'm saying
to
I
understand
think
this.
we're living
Yeah,
it, so I
yeah,
think our
yeah.
being able to express it is going to be
Yeah,
a bit.
yeah. No, but it's interesting enough. I think I like how you made the point of beautiful men and women are uniting too.
And just to add to this, I feel like this is also a time where I feel like these films that you mentioned, women-centric films, it's also like a very safe space. I don't like this men and women like segregating it. But maybe these are safe spaces for men also to exercise their sensitivity. Just being around women, just, hearing them. Because there is so much conditioning in both the genders. The way we saw our parents, the way we got educated with these stereotypical notions of genders and what they should do. When we work around each other in these films, in these spaces, that's also like a very safe space for men to exercise that sensitivity. And I won't be surprised if, like 5 years later, we actually see men-centric films about very similar, very subtle spaces of, what goes through. That would be like a natural evolution because it has to be.
No, like she mentioned, I mean, there are opposing forces as well. Each time you push it to you push boundaries, right? Even with respect to men, we are seeing the same as well. The more you encourage men to accept their femininity, for example, then the original identity gets drummed in even further in a very fundamentalist, almost angry way, right? In terms of, us men gotta, take control of things, you know what I'm saying. So yeah.
We do. Yeah.
Just want to add one small point to that, to speak to your monolith point and to the diversity point that you'd mentioned, is that one thing that you could look at, another way of looking at it also is that much like there's a diversity of audiences as well, and there's a diversity of creators, right? And you have Sabar Bonda as well, which is an LGBTQ film, a queer story as well. So I think, I mean, there may have been monoliths of making earlier, but what we're seeing now is an opening up of a diversity that speaks to a diversity in the audience, a diversity in the way things are getting made, a diversity in the makers, and also a diversity and hunger for diversity from the festivals or anyone and everyone. So it perhaps speaks to a change in the entire ecosystem, which is just one of making space.
Right. I mean, I found the film to be a really difficult watch, and I mean it in a very good way, especially in terms of processing the mindset of this character, Maya, and what seemed to me to be a really thankless life in a sense. I can't even begin to comprehend what her mind space must have been. So, Tillotama, I wondered if you could shed insight in you trying to understand her mental space in terms of her life and how she sees the world in embodying her, I suppose. I know it's a very broad question, but...
No, I was just wondering if Didi can answer this.
Okay,
yeah, better than...
I don't think you can just talk about it as just like there's so much going on, but so much going on, and when you're a mother, and when you're a wife, when you are a worker, you have responsibility of the house, you have responsibility of so many things. When you have responsibility of putting everything together, and I think there is a lot of time. You don't have time to think, really. You are on automation, but what you're powered by is care. What you're powered by is a drive, and that drive is to love, care, sustain, and go on. And in that, I don't think Maya's thinking what is going through her head right now. But it is interesting that when we are watching, we are wanting to think. By doing that, what we are doing is actually we are going close to the character, and at the same time, what her strength is also keeping everything together, and I think that is what happens to the society at large also, and it goes and it's invisible most of the time because it's a given. It's not a choice. A lot of time it's not a choice also for the woman. Okay, she's put in it, and she just has to perform. Okay, but I find strength in that. I find the resilience, the resilience of
to be able to wake up the next morning and to start doing things again.
Yeah, and you just go on doing it because actually you care. It comes from a very simple part of the person.
Yeah, I think if it came from a place of duty alone, I don't think it could last too long, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it comes from there, and Tilly, you would want to add to that, like what?
Personally, just in acting, I mean, as an actor, you're constantly like feel very culpable because you just come and live for a few days, a strenuous life of an actor, and you get so tired just acting, you know. Then you think about the person who's actually living it every day, and then your exhaustion, you know, really reduces dramatically. Because you understand that you're going to go back to a bed that is made, and some other woman actually taking care of you, which in my life is Lata. So for me, there was a sense of exhaustion of just thinking of the number of things Maya has to do, but then it becomes very mathematical then as an actor, because then if you have to do so many things and divided by 24 hours, so how many hours do you have for this job, and what's the distance between job A and job B, and to geographically cover that, then how fast do you have to walk, how fast do you have to buy the vegetables, how do you cut through time, because you know there is only 24 hours. So even though in a film which is only 2.5 hours or 2 hours or whatever the time is, then it becomes very mathematical, and I think in a way that's what we do when we are running a house, right? And I see that in my mother. She's really short like me, and so she knows she has to cover more distance, literally, and in less time. And as a result, she walks so fast, like, you know, she walks so fast, and now seeing her, I walk fast even when it's not needed to walk. Lahe Lahe is a beautiful Assamese thing of which I really want to get the Lahe Lahe in my life, but it's a conditioning that I have to unlearn first, that because I've seen my mother do things so fast, because you just don't know 10 other things that the family will need that will come up, you know. So this, I think, division of time, which increases the speed at which you do things, the efficiency with which you do things, and the weight of things when you do something every day, like that iron she had to lift every day. I had to lift that iron with both hands on, you know, because I couldn't lift it. But then you think, and you just think you can lift this iron because you've lifted it every day. So it's not about muscle strength as much as it was my arm. It's not like I worked out and then became capable of lifting it. It was just thinking for a moment, the numerous women who lift that every day, and then they help you, you know, all the people you've seen heavy lift in your life, it comes in, you know, and it's all often weight, time, very actually tangible things, which you get a blueprint of. Didi?
Yeah, I like how your answer draws so much more from science than it does from emotion, I think. You know what I'm saying?
It's
right?
very emotional science.
No, I know. Yeah.
Home science. Thana, I said
No, but there's a lot of calculation put into it, right?
Only women studied home science.
Right.
Yeah, as an elective.
There is a part in the film where again death is referenced, right? Right at the beginning, there's a joke about a husband, of course, that we went through. But eventually, there is a line that goes something like, "Life becomes easy when you're dead." I think Bala made a Tamil film called Naan Kadavul, where, you know, people suffer and suffer and suffer, and death seems almost a very desirable release. It feels like, you know what, there is no escaping the drudgery of it, the thankless drudgery of it. And suddenly I was thinking about those spaces as well while I was watching this film. You speak about the care that she instinctively feels in her bones that keeps her doing this, right? Is there a fuel needed for that care to last, do you think, or do you think that's just what coded in?
So one key understanding for us, which is specific to the story and to Maya and Sundar's relationship, is that love was a rebellion. and that how that rebellion becomes identity, becomes something that she fights for, becomes so. So the care is also part of that rebellion, and it's something she is doing for herself. So it's not only altruism. It's also to see that love between her and Sundar is also a lot to do with her. And so that was a very key. So then once you think of it in that way, then you don't think of a need for an outside fuel.
Yeah, it's like each time she goes to her family, she comes back with renewed strength almost.
Yes. Because it's again, she comes back to how all of this is her rebellion.
She's like, yeah, I was just losing motivation, but thanks for giving it to me.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was Bertrand Russell who said that work is extremely overrated. We should all aspire for an inherent idleness in life and all of that. While that's a very privileged sort of take on things, some of her work, like the word you used was exhaustion. It really, I was full of exhaustion just watching her do these things, right? She almost collapses in the chair for a brief moment of respite, and you think, please let this woman be. But then the dude disappears, and then she now has to go out searching for him, very sleepless. I really enjoyed your performance in that scene, by the way. But then it also feels like when she's working, it seems its own form of strange catharsis.
I'd like to, because we spoke a lot about this during the writing.
Yeah.
And we actually, wished we had more work in the film, because the work is also her me time. And while it is also, there's exhaustion, there's the strain, but this is also where she untangles her feelings in a very physical way. And this, when she's doing the work, she's not thinking about the next work because she's doing this work. So then there's a kind of a, being present. And being that is the time where she can wrestle with the things that she otherwise doesn't have time to.
Yeah, like in the scene where she's folding clothes, there is this woman who comes in offering her tea to drink and says, relax, sit here, drink. I'm like, let the woman be,
I mean, that's a good example, because in that the middle class altruism of sit down, have a cup of tea is the last thing she needs.
Yeah.
Actually, her staying alone and folding those clothes is more the therapeutic moment that she needs to deal with what she's going through.
I think these nuances do come out, I think, when you're... Yes. I think if you're on some level seeing her, then I do think it comes out. Yeah, and these are the joys for me in consuming this kind of cinema. Right, because these allow you to make your interpretations right or wrong. They allow you to develop your own feelings about what you're watching, I suppose. Both Sundar and Maya, they seem like such hard characters to play. Their lives are inherently hard, of course, but and Sundar seemed less of a husband and more of a son, I suppose, in many ways, because she's constantly tending to him, taking care of him in all the ways that one would do an infant, I guess. So do you want to talk about this specific kind of marriage, this relationship, and how you processed this relationship, and how that maybe affected how you treated him in a physical way, or how you responded to him in the film?
I think I've often made the mistake of, making these kind of jokes that actually don't hold any water about husbands being like children. But specific to this film, I'd like to say that while she is in a position of having to take care, she's also taken care of by Sundar in ways that her child can't take care of her. He knows the fault lines in her. And I think what I enjoyed playing the most was perhaps in the scene when she tries to get Sundar a job. And in playing of the scene, something that I didn't clock in when I was reading the script was her inherent arrogance in the way she breaks into English, how she's been educated, how she thinks she can get him a job, but she knows how to play the room. And Sundar doesn't, and she doesn't let Sundar answer any questions. She answers all of them. And and when Sundar leaves, Tillotama felt that, wow, Maya is quite a, there is this darkness in her that I enjoy playing, because she's not just this incredible giving woman who's just amazing and holds her family together and works so hard. Yeah, all that's great. Most women do that in our country, and they're taking care of many things and many people. But I liked that. I liked the tenderness that Sundar reads, that when he gives her a back rub, when he knows he's taken things too far, and his focus comes back. Only he can touch her that way, and only he can know where to touch so that her body can just relax. And I think that it's a very mature look at a relationship without making it just good or bad, or a good man, a bad man, good woman, bad woman kind of thing. And and that grown-up intimacy between a couple, which is, it's not a parent-child thing.
Do you, I mean, about while we are talking on Sundar, right? I mean, he suffers from PTSD, but you don't necessarily spell it out. It's not really well explored in very, how do we put it, in ways that specifically tell us, oh, this is what's going on and this is how it's manifesting in him. There's a lot of, let's just capture him suffering from it or dealing with it.
So both me and Somu, we were clear about one thing, is that we want to look at the emotional aspect of mental distress. We don't want to look at it clinically. And in that, we are in the same position as Maya. We want to look at it with care, we want to look at it with love, and we want to put ourselves there standing next to Maya and look at it like that. And so, because whatever he's going through is so huge and so unfathomable probably, So we are not in a position to say we understand it all and here we will show it to you, And we don't have that arrogance, and we never had that arrogance. And we just cannot. You cannot do that. And we have to look at it with love. And we wanted to understand with love, with care, as a family. So we are that invisible family standing there and feeling helpless sometimes. What can we do? How can we deal with this? Sometimes we are like Debu, sometimes we are like Maya. And we wanted to look at it like that.
Yeah.
So.
Do you want to talk about the relationship between the mother and the son as well, in the context of this conversation? Mainly because there's a scene where he's crying and, well, it allows her to probably become vulnerable in that moment, and she starts expressing her feelings about it as well. And suffering, strangely, I think, has a strange way of bringing people together as well, even though it might drive some people away from each other. And bonds forged in that sort of setup seem to somehow be stronger than bonds forged in a lot of health and lightness. So yeah. And blame her, she's getting me into all these spaces now.
So I had a friend while I was growing up, was my classmate when we were about 7, 8, 9 years old. And his father thought that he was God, and he would often come to the school, disturb the class, because he thought the son of God shouldn't be in school. And then he got run over by a train because he tried to stop a train. But what came from that, like, what earlier when you were talking about the father was like a son to the mother. I think it was, with my memory of this friend was that it was the son who was almost like the father to the father, and that father-son relationship had inversed, and in that, the son often gets put in the position of an ally to the mother, and so he's on the one hand he's an ally, and but then on the other hand, he also really wants a father. And so if any of the other children laughed, he would get violent. He would defend his father with with everything he had, and he was incredibly proud of his father.
I think there was a point in the film where I welled up just thinking about this boy, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, I think there are few sadder things than a child having to become an adult very early.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It felt like he was pushed into those zones. Hey, did you go searching? Did you find him?
Yeah.
But
And
he
that was-
shouldn't be expected to.
But that was very, because the other characters have an element of choice. I mean, you could maybe disagree with Sundar, but the adults did make choices to bring them where they are, whereas Debu didn't. And so he's been born into this, and he's having to shoulder a lot of responsibility and a lot of but it's not a burden, and that was very important. I mean, for me, this memory of my friend was that he was really proud of his father. And so, from the outside, you can easily look at it in terms of, that it's a burden, that it was difficult, no childhood. He loved his father. So we can't take that away from, Debu's distress at the end is...
Let's not empathize with him to the point of hating someone else.
Yeah, and Debu feels the loss, and so it's so that's the kind of the knotted loves that we were interested in.
Yeah, like she said, the complicated beings that we are as well, right? Maybe stepping away briefly from the weight of the content, this is a film with many producers, right? And I can probably ask some of you to weigh in terms of the value that you saw in getting together for this project, and why the numbers were important in terms of bringing as many people, because that's new.
I think, independent filmmaking can be quite difficult, and filmmaking in essentially is quite an expensive process. And sometimes if that burden falls on one or two people, that can make for quite a difficult journey, both in terms of, especially practically. So independent filmmaking and filmmaking in general is quite an expensive process, and that can be quite a difficult thing to navigate. So the idea of getting so many people together was, in one essence, was to try and find a way where we could spread that responsibility and spread that burden in a way that could be shared as a community of people that come together to support something. But something that emerged from that process also, which was really beautiful, was that not only was it a shared level of a shared practical responsibility, it became a shared creative responsibility, and also a way where everyone with this constellation of people that have joined, it became a way where everyone could bring with them their own experiences and their own strengths to a project. And it really looks like if that can work together, it really makes the whole film really larger than the sum of its parts in terms of the producers. So you have people like Sid, for example, who comes on board with Bridge, who can bring the level of experience he does in post-production, and then people like Vikram as well, who bring on the wealth of experience they have with navigating this entire space for so long. And across everyone as well, where we have so many different people who come from very different kind of experiences in independent filmmaking and filmmaking in general. But
and there was no question of it being tugged in different directions.
No, not at all. And in fact, what the model that brought everyone together was that it was equitable. So no matter anyone's seniority or the time at which they joined, they all joined on the same terms and in a way that they share. It's all pari passu, and it's all the same waterfall if you're using technical terms, which is just that it's fair. Everyone has the same terms, no matter when and how they joined, and with what sort of experience or anything that they joined with. So yeah, it felt like a way where if independent filmmaking is difficult, we can share. If we share that difficulty, maybe it's not so difficult after all.
Okay. While we're on it, would one of you want to chime in?
I don't know. I mean, for me, it was easy to get on board. He just said Barakpur and Dadabudi biryani, and I said, okay, I'm taking a flight.
On the question also of it being tugged in different directions, that was actually never really a possibility, because everybody came on board fundamentally knowing it was their film. And they were extremely generous in terms of how much they invited feedback and responses from script to edit and all the way through. But at the end of the day, it was their vision. And everybody who came on board understood that.
So you all had a part to play in responding to what the script was and all of that as well.
I mean, it would be a huge waste on our part if we didn't make use of of the wonderful feedbacks that we could receive, with the script and with the edit. Everyone was.
So this was a case of the more the merrier.
Yeah, and because we had more producers, we could also choose to send different people different cuts.
Yeah, I mean,
not everyone the same cut. So we had people who we'd give the first cut to, and then not to tire them out, give someone else a cut later on, and those feedback were really precious.
Was it then important for you to figure out people who'd get it? It wasn't just. Yeah, I mean, you need to understand the vision that we are operating with here, and it's not just enough to get a bunch of people who are willing to invest in it. But
I don't think anyone joined in terms of a practical aspect of, I just want to get this made or I'm going to get this kind of return from that. Obviously, they saw the value in doing that, but I think early on in the process, everyone, the real strength that everyone bandied around and joined towards was the script. They saw the value in the script and they saw the tremendous power that it had, and I think that's something that it made it a very easy conversation, where if you share the script with someone, you had a pretty solid chance that they join. And after that, it was the same thing with the edit. So to speak to what Aman said, everyone joined with that purpose and with the idea that we'd keep value that artistic integrity that Somo and Tanushree brought to the film, and to find a way to protect it. So I don't think that was, we always had that clear compass and through line.
I mean, while we are entering the final leg of this conversation, maybe I can just ask you a couple of more things. Even if it feels inherently wrong to appreciate aesthetics in a film where somebody seems to be going through a lot, I enjoyed at least a couple of moments where I was like, you know what, I like how this looks regardless of what's happening in it. I think there was one shot where there's like a blue-green sort of wall, and I think Maya her head is down to the left of the frame, and you have all this space to the right. And for a brief moment, it struck me as being an existentialist painting on some level. Right? It really felt like it, and I really enjoyed how you also shoot that conversation between Maya and Sundar later on, where parts of their faces are illuminated and the other half is in darkness, and I like the intimacy of it, just the close-up of it. And I mean, I would hate myself if I didn't mention these things while I still have the opportunity to, so I am. If you do have something to add, then I would encourage you to. In terms of, just...
I mean, one thing in the shooting of it, we wanted, there's so much that is left unsaid, that we wanted the spaces to be an important part of the frame. So to shoot, with more, with more depth of field, to include the locations, to make Barakpur and the houses also give you clues into understanding the nuances of character. So we approached the location scouts very in a very similar way to the way we approach casting, which is that each house, we had backstories for characters. And we didn't want to, we took that away from the script, but it had to come into the location. So that became, one need for the storytelling, and also the visuals had to be open to absorb all of that. But as the story progresses, it becomes more and more emotional, and so there's a kind of a zoning in to the faces of the characters, and the scene that you mentioned, we don't see you in the background, it's just black, and the sound is also taken away, and it just becomes the conversation. And but by that time, we hope that these people, you feel, whereas at the beginning, often the characters are seen very much in context of the surrounding, and the context is important to understand them as people.
Yeah, I mean, you spoke about these backstories, right? Was there any that screamed out to you to be included?
I mean, there were many things that we should ideally, in one sense, the audience would have many questions, and so it was a question to us that are these multiple questions good or bad, but I think for us, questions are always invitations. So to leave things unsaid is a way to, and if you have questions, then you're already imagining.
Yeah. For example, the question about, hey, what did Sundar go through?
Yes.
It gets briefly answered when you see somebody sort of suffocating him, a policeman, and you can see that the struggle isn't just him responding to that moment, but something drawn from somewhere else, right?
Yes. So all of these were very much discussed.
Yeah. Maybe as a last question, if you could write a destiny for this film, the directions that it deserves to take, in your opinion, what would it be?
I think that's the wrong question to ask the parents.
I mean, people are allowed to dream.
100 more films like this.
Yes.
1,000 more films, whatever. Just more movies, more producers, more stories from the country that can be shown here, that can travel, that can create business, that can spawn more filmmakers. I think my biggest worry as a producer today or director of producer today becomes, where's the next generation of filmmakers coming from? Because your avenues for distribution, if they're not there, what actually happens? I think if something like this works ideally at a scale where many more films can be made, that's great. That's this film aside, that they can answer. I'm not answering.
I'd just add to that jumping back to that first point that you'd made, which is that it finds its audience, and I believe that there's a very large audience for it, and it finds which we're all very hopeful for and very optimistic about, is that it travels to that audience in India and across the world, where people can watch it.
Yeah, I like how we went back to the very beginning. I think that gives us a nice poetic sort of end to this conversation. Thank you very much. And if some of you feel like I haven't necessarily given you too much space in which to express yourselves, I'm really sorry. But this was a very unique experience for me as well. So thank you for the conversation, and I wish you all and the film the very best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.